Welcome to the Whole Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you become a fat burner, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, it's your host of the Whole Athlete Podcast with a very exciting show today on one of my favorite topics. Again, fat adaptation for the endurance athlete and metabolic efficiency and being fit and healthy. Because I see so many athletes that are fit and not so lean and not so healthy. So I really talk about on this show, and my method of coaching athletes is to be fit and healthy on the inside and out. And part of my journey from being a competitive top age group triathlete, marathoner, long distance cyclist is that I was fit on the outside, but not so healthy on the inside. And as I change my career focus this fall, I'm going to be doing this full time to help educate other athletes on how you are training. If you're training the whole athlete from the inside out with what you now know, the holistic method, talking about nutrition and exercise, but also coaching people on sleep, stress, mobility, movement, digestion, gut health, which is essential for athletes, we'll talk about today, and hydration, making sure you're drinking enough water throughout the day, and also not drinking when you're having your meal so you don't dilute that stomach acid. And then a really big one of the holistic method, especially for us uptight type A triathletes, competitive athletes, is making more time for happiness, play, and being silly, laughing. I think we get a little too serious as we get competitive. And I know I was, especially as I got to have more quote unquote adrenal exhaustion. And so now I'm sharing my journey and focusing on helping people not live life as a race. And today I have one amazing mentor and researcher, Dr. Paul Laursen. He's a low-carb researcher and elite endurance coach and co-founder of HIIT Science. Dr. Paul Laursen resides in he focused on exercise performance research, theory, and application. And he's an adjunct professor of exercise physiology of AUT University in New Zealand, where he leads research into low-carb diet and the performance applications. Dr. Laursen has published over 130 peer-reviewed papers and is co-founder of HIIT Science. That's HIIT, high-intensity interval training. And he serves to teach the science and application of high-intensity interval training. Check out the links in our show notes for his book and online course that actually was done with part of the program with Dr. Phil Maffetone, one of my other favorite peers for years and years and years to learn from, mentors. But Paul himself is a leading researcher in this industry. And we're going to dive into metabolic efficiency and training athletes to be fat adapted, and our viewpoints on being fit and healthy, as there's a lot of athletes that are still training, but they're not losing fat weight. And that is a big thing I've been blogging about. If you go to debbiepotts.net to my blog post, you'll be able to read more about my thoughts. And if you listen to Thursday's edition of this podcast, it's just me jabbering about different thoughts of what I'm learning and seeing out there. And right now, it's a lot of being fit, fat, and unhealthy. I'm sorry, but I think a lot of us are still struggling to lose fat weight, even though you're trying with exercise. But as I tell my personal training clients, you cannot out-exercise a bad diet. And that diet you might think is good for you, but it actually might be not according to your metabolic type. And you perhaps are chronically stressed, which is driving your blood sugar up and causing gut dysfunction and digestion malfunction. So you're not even absorbing your nutrients, and you could be spiking up your blood sugar levels, even if you're eating low carb, high fat meals and doing fasting, because as Dr. Paul Laursen and I talk about, if you could measure your blood sugar continuously with those new devices, you'll be able to see how you react to stress and overtraining and under recovery and incorrect macronutrients of your nutrition. So with that, I will stop talking because this is definitely a topic I can just go on for half an hour and do my own podcast on this, because this is my favorite area, talking about how to be a fat adapted athlete, how to train the whole you with the holistic methods. So Dr. Paul Laursen knows his share of research, and we can learn a lot from him. And we'll talk at the end of the show, if you hold on through the whole show. Dr. Paul Laursen and I will both be at Ironman Hawaii, and if you are there Tuesday, October 8th, we are going to do a special fat-adapted, low-carb athlete meetup, place to be determined, somewhere on Leahy Drive, maybe near Lava Java and Bike Works, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m., right before the parade that happens at 5. So come join us, have a social gathering with other like-minded athletes who are interested in learning more about how to be fat-adapted and get off the blood sugar roller coaster and chronic inflammation and speeding up the aging process with that high sugar diet that athletes still do. So let's listen to Dr. Paul Laursen and not listen to me. And we'll come back next Thursday for a special edition on fat digestion and more with me. All right, let's bring on Paul. You are someone I've been hearing about for years, and talk a little bit, we did a little intro on your bio, but how you got into this area of fat adaptation, the expert, the go-to guy.
Sure. Well, it's a long story, but let's see if I can cut it a little bit short. So I guess it would maybe have started when I was at High Performance Sport New Zealand. So I was working as a leader in the New Zealand Olympic program for, bringing physiology to coaches to try to help their Olympic program athletes perform better on the world stage. And I'm an athlete myself, done a lot of these Ironman triathlons and whatnot. So you'd think I'd be pretty healthy. And, I was going along my various different days and having my classic, long flat whites with 2 sugars and a big muffin and, big bar of chocolate at night, on and on. I kind of, living my very high carb life and still training quite hard. And by this time in my life, I'm about, turning 40, 41, and lo and behold, doing all this training still for my Ironman, I'm getting unhealthy. So I'm noticing sort of this myself. And then a big guy I follow on the world stage, you probably know, is Tim Noakes. And Tim made a big change. And I said, and I was getting high blood pressure. I was having to go to the doctor and whatnot. And things just like Tim, like so many of us, things just weren't kind of making sense, in accordance with the guidelines that I was recommending to everyone, all my athletes, talking about teaching large lecture halls, etc. And made the swap to the low carb, high fat. And I guess really just, I did have a very, profound personal transformation in terms of, my own experience. So I switched from being the unhealthy athlete to the high carb athlete to swapping my metabolism to be able to burn more fat, to being more healthy, to dropping 10 kilos of weight. And lo and behold, something that, I couldn't do throughout my, 15 Ironmans that I was competing on year after year. I finally got under 10 hours. And that was a big thing. That was at a hard Ironman event. That was at the New Zealand Taupo Ironman. I finally got under the 10-hour barrier. And it was, I guess switching my diet, becoming healthy was one of the biggest, most profound influencers, I believe, on that. And the cool thing is working in, at a university and whatnot, is you get to document all of this sort of yourself at the same time. And we've written many blogs on these sorts of things on the Blues and Prof website. But yeah, that's my general short version history of how, I guess, when I first came to realizing it. Now, and it moved from that after, right? So now I had my own personal influence, and now I wanted to try to help others. And that, I could see this happening to so many of the athletes that were within the program as well. And that caused lots of various different controversies that I can remember too well. But, that's really when I should also mention, I published some stuff on this too. And lo and behold, I got this email one day from one of the, fellas that I looked up to, and one of my, I'd call him a mentor and whatnot in the world. And that was Dr. Phil Maffetone, of course. And he sent me this email. It's like, you finally showed this. You finally showed that fat oxidation at high exercise intensities is not only possible, but beneficial for performance. And we can link to that paper that Phil read and was so, blown away by. And then that really started my relationship with Dr. Maffetone, and we published, a paper I know you're familiar with, Debbie, on the fit but unhealthy athlete. And I think those are probably the two key experiences, and that's my general history into how I got into these sorts of things. And Dan, of course, was instrumental in all of these sorts of along the way. I know you've interviewed him too.
Yeah, well, we've interviewed Dr. Maffetone many times, as he was my inspiration too early on, as I worked with Mark Allen in 2003 when I joined. I started Ironman's 2001 and started Mark Allen's elite team in 2003, 4. I think I joined a team, but training with him 2003. And that's how we trained, was Maffetone heart rate. And way before then, I was doing Sally Edwards, dating myself, but she created the Heart Zone training and heart rate monitor training with Puller back then. And we did that at where I worked, and we were doing heart rate training for years, is my point. And then when I got to read and more about Maffetone from his amazing books, and Mark Allen, of course, used his training method and the max aerobic function heart rate. And that's kind of my journey of it. And then I started doing the metabolic testing cart in 2005, but it wasn't until, I can't remember, I was trying to figure this out, 2008 or maybe 7, I started learning more about it was more my own personal experience that this high carb nutrition plan didn't really work for me. Actually, I can say that I started in 2001 was my first Ironman. And when I was eating a banana, a bagel, and having orange juice, and then going to work out, and then I had to have 500 calories an hour, that's when I started going, okay, this isn't working for me. And I'd do an Ironman, be throwing up the whole bike ride because it was too much food and liquid sitting in there. But I was doing what I was told. And so I guess I started it back in 2001 overall. But it is kind of that journey that we have, I think, as coaches, and you're a researcher, a doctor, that you start to get that self-experimentation, then becomes your passion and your purpose to share this information with other people, as I do via my blog and podcast. So cool. I appreciate that, what you've been doing as well. So let's just kind of go over, I think the first thing to talk about is fat oxidation and what fat adaptation means to you for endurance athletes.
Sure. Well, I guess what it means to me is that if you're fat adapted, you are able to ultimately, very simply, burn more fat than you probably did in the past. Typically, if you a traditional base diet, you will have, it generally has a higher composition of carbohydrate and which you're going to become more used to burning. Now, the problem is that the big problem here is that we've only got a limited store of carbohydrates on board in the form of liver and muscle glycogen, right? So you've got about 350 grams of skeletal muscle glycogen on board, and you've got about 100 grams of liver glycogen on board. Now, that's about 2,000 calories, thereabouts, and that is a finite store of energy. You're going to be, if you're performing, like at marathon exercise intensity or a little bit above that, that's going to be gone in just over 2 hours. And that's the typical classic, I guess, phenomena of hitting the wall. If you know that feeling, if you felt the bonk, those are key. That will happen, and that happens a lot less the more fat adapted you become. In fact, you can become so fat adapted, we have discovered, or that that is almost absent at some level. So the process of fat adaptation is working more towards having it so that is less of a problem. And you do that ultimately through a combination, I guess, of your diet, profound or mostly, and then a little bit with the training as well.
Well, that's what I find interesting. As we did metabolic efficiency testing, and once I did Bob Siebelhor's metabolic efficiency specialist program, and he says it's more 75% of becoming metabolically efficient is via what you're eating, and 25% of metabolic efficiency to improve it is via your exercise, your training. So is that kind of similar to your philosophy?
Yeah, that's a good ballpark. Absolutely. It's really remarkable, but you can make such a profound influence just through the diet. The diet alone, like a combination of what it is you're actually paying attention to, what it is that you're eating, whole food sources, higher, sources that are more higher in fat, typically, and you'll make a huge influence there. And I often recommend this, like, to my busy athletes, right? So like yourself, probably, W, you're coaching athletes that are sometimes, city dwellers, and they're working long hours and they can't squeeze in their training at a certain time. And one of the things you can do is really recommend them to do like periods of intermittent fasting, or when they need that energy boost, making sure that they're low carb, high fat sources that they're having in those periods. So and even just by doing that, they really don't lose too much fitness. That was one of the things even working in my high stress job, that's one of the things that I found was fascinating, was even when I had to go through these periods of lower training loads and higher stress, if I still followed those rules, the diet or intermittent fasting, I'd come back and I really wouldn't lose that much fitness. I could still go out and do these longer rides unfed, and really quite remarkable. It was profound change from before.
So low carb, high fat, I find, or just when I keep saying low carb athlete, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're fat adapted, because I know a lot of people might take a lot of carbohydrates, but maybe they're not burning fat. Do you find that an area of opportunity for people? They're still not fat adapted, but they're doing low carb, but they're not eating low carb enough, or enough fat or protein, or, as I always talk about, chronic stress impacts the whole athlete and impairs your ability to be fat adapted if you are chronically stressed, which most of us is, and that's what my whole book, Life is Not a Race, is about. But also poor digestion, absorption, gut health issues, internal and external stressors. So is low carb athlete mean you're a fat adapted athlete?
Yeah, that's a good point. So you could be, to your point, you could be still, consuming low carb, high fat sources of energy during your day, but not maximizing, which is probably going to be better than a high, it's definitely going to be better than a high sugar source, or a Coca-Cola, name your sweet. It's definitely be better than that. Couldn't be as good if you're controlling and keeping your stress at bay. So, and that is due to the influence of the hormone cortisol, which is released, predominantly the hormone cortisol, which is released when we have high periods of stress. Right, so cortisol is what we call a glucocorticoid. If you listen to that word, gluco is in that word. So its job, right, when we're stressed, is to release glucose, right? So it spills out more glucose. What happens when we have glucose being released? More insulin. So it's very so cortisol and stress is insulinemic, and we're causing for ultimately a blunting of our fat fat oxidation rates. So we can't, it's not quite as good as if we were keeping cortisol at bay. All right. And sleep is one of the most important things we can do for that as well. Right. I know if we're waking up in the middle of the night constantly, it's suggestive that stress level is quite high. And our cortisol level is going to be up in the middle of the night. I know when I've worn like a continuous blood glucose monitor. I'm not sure if you've tried those things yet, but they're amazing, and they're really quite telling. Sometimes I get these. I would get my massive spikes in glucose wearing my CGM when I'd be receiving like an email from finance where I made a mistake or whatnot and was being punished, and it would I'd see my glucose spike massively during the day, and this was during like a fast, so quite profound. And then the same sort of thing happening in the middle of the night. I could wake up in the middle of the night. It's called the dawn phenomenon, and again you get these massive spikes there. So loads of learning myself with the CGM and being an unhealthy athlete and all these sorts of things. But yeah, we want to keep stress at bay if we can, because it's all part of becoming the whole athlete, to your point.
So that's just kind of what we're getting towards discussing, is being fit and healthy, which, I'm exact example of what happened to me in 2013 when I was top age group triathlete, finishing amazing Ironman triathlon season, Ironman Hawaii, and then it was just downhill spiral. And then since March 2013, I have not returned to Ironman. And I keep speaking about fit and unhealthy, and Stephanie Holbrook mentioned your study in the seminar we did on Jimmy Moore's low carb cruise a month ago, and being fit and unhealthy. And I keep saying fit, fat and unhealthy, because I see so many athletes that are working out endurance. You think you would get lean and strong and lose weight, but I think it's same thing. It's all overlapping. And what I call the holistic method is working on the whole athlete from the inside out, that we need to be fit and healthy. And part of that I can see is, there's a lot of overweight people that are doing these races. No offense to people, but they think they're going to lose weight, and they don't, because you think, I just biked 5 hours. I'm running 2 hours the next day. Why don't they lose weight? Weight.
Absolutely. Well, Tim Noakes made a really good tweet about this the other day, and you're so right to your observation. I think it's remarkable how when you'll go to any sort of endurance event, name it, marathon, bike race, triathlon, etc. And it should be a group of very fit, lean individuals, and I'm not seeing that, and you're not seeing it either. Why is that? Well, again, I think we've got the message incorrect, and maybe gels might have their time and place at a certain given time in an event to give you that last little boost, but in excess, which is probably the case in too many, that's just not helping us. So that's, and then, again, we have to look at the whole athlete. And that is, a lot of us are coming from these very busy lifestyles where life is a bit of a race and cortisol is high. Dietary choices are incorrect, and we have unhealthy, fit people, fit but unhealthy, and we're seeing. So unfortunately, exercise itself is not the panacea for a recipe for being healthy necessarily. It's part of the puzzle, but you have to have these other players there as well to become more whole, I guess. We've all learned this.
Yes. And I think the training part, as maffetone, max aerobic function heart rate, training 180 minus age, plus or minus 5 beats. So that's what you find to coach people to stay there until they need to, or you kind of maffetone's philosophy of build that base, and then when you're not seeing improvements, then add some interval training, some HIIT training, or how do we boost our max fat burning range through exercise?
Yeah, so great question. And, there's, as we always say, there's lots of roads that lead to Rome, loads of ways to skin the cat when it comes to training. But my general philosophy, and this is based on observational studies that tend to work, relate to what's called the polarization theory of exercise training, where approximately 80%, the bulk of your training, should be in that MAF range, or we call it the aerobic threshold zone, right? So if you're in your MAF zone and below that, then you're going to be hitting that mark. The remaining 20% it could be done more as a high intensity, some form of a high intensity stimulus. That could be threshold training, right? So, tempo training, and also high intensity interval training, which, there's loads of different ways where this could be, a exercise that's performed for 15 to 30 seconds at an exercise intensity that's about 120% of your max, your VO2 max, with an equal amount, a 1-to-1 sort of work to rest ratio, and then various different sets of this. Coaches will be able to prescribe this in various different ways. And but again, that's if we have about 20% of the overall volume of our training in that high intensity range spread across the week with adequate recovery between these. This is giving us, again, a lot of the stimuli that our body really likes to adapt. But of course, you've got to give it that period of rest thereafter, and that's really the key. So I'm not a big believer in just doing the MAF training only. And to be honest, Dr. Maffetone isn't either. He says that's the biggest misconception that people get, is that he's completely anti-HIIT training. Well, he was one of the co-authors in my recent book, The Science and Application of High Intensity Interval Training. Of course, he did the health section, but are you going to, Mark Allen certainly did interval training to lead up to his, 6 Ironman World Championships. And he'll definitely tell you that. But it's just given in the right doses, and it's given after we've reached a healthy status. So it's about that 80-20 balance is ideal. But sometimes we definitely do need to go through that period of a bit of a break to just do that aerobic training until we become healthy.
Okay, 2 things is rest-based training, like you're saying, overtraining. People don't recover enough. And the other thing is the doses is a good word, the dosage of the HIIT training. And part 2 of that is people don't go hard enough to make it high intensity, I think, a lot of times. And they don't, do go hard and then recover low enough. Like if we use my zone in my fitness studio. So go red zone and then don't start your next interval until you're back down in that blue or green zone. Or else people just stay in that black hole training, as Ben Greenfield would say, and just be there for an hour and a half and not do high-low or really low. I think so many people, I was in Austin the other weekend, I ran each day during this conference, and it's like everyone seems to be in that black hole the whole time. So I was doing my 4-minute run, 1-minute walk, doing some intervals. And so anyways, do you find that an area of opportunity for people that they don't go hard enough and recover enough, or they just stay in that middle section that doesn't give you the same amount of benefits as a HIIT dose?
Yes, 100%. It's probably one of the most common mistakes that athletes fall into. And one of the things that actually do are overtraining syndrome. Okay, so we call, let's just call it maybe sweet spot training. If we're always doing sweet spot training, that's sort of right between the high intensity stim and the low intensity stim. There's actually still this, a spillover of the cortisol ultimately that winds up happening. It disturbs our central nervous system, but it's so easy to do that because when we're in that sweet spot, that's kind of around your threshold, actually, your aerobic or anaerobic threshold. it's easy to fall into that because it still doesn't feel quite that hard, but it's maybe you're right at, you're violating the talk test ultimately. And yeah, so to your point, you're not doing the high intensity training. You're not, but you're still sabotaging the period of time when you could get into that high intensity interval training. And let's talk about the benefits of HIIT training. So when we do this right, and we are able to go maximally for a short period of time and then rest, which is the definition of HIIT training, we are able to recruit our fast twitch muscle fibers, which you don't get on a regular basis, right? Now, these are our big muscle fibers that are, we have them all over our body, but predominantly we want to recruit the ones in our legs, the largest ones, right? When you're doing either cycling or run training at a very high intensity, you want to stimulate those for a short time and then allow those to rest. The other thing you get with HIIT training is you get a maximal stimulus of your stroke volume or cardiac output, again, which you don't always get during the lower intensity or sweet spot sort of training. So there's two sort of those two key elements of the HIIT training are ideal for, I guess, delaying aging and maximizing performance ultimately, because those are the things that we're going to lose, especially as we age. The ability to recruit our fast twitch muscle fibers and the ability to maximally, recruit the heart muscle, so the ventricular stretching and the stroke volume. So we want to keep that up as long as we can. So yes, to your point, we definitely we don't want to fall into that trap of going into no man's land too often. When you train easy. When you train hard, purposefully do that HIIT training. That is sort of best practice.
Perfect. So switching gears, going back to nutrition, the fat adaptation process for someone that's going from a high carb, standard American diet, high sugar volume fuel plan to a low carb to be more a fat burner. So flipping that switch, so to speak. How do they make that transition in, like I do a 30-day program with people, but how do you do it? And then let's move in towards carb dosing for those that are training longer, and then in a race, do they take more carbs beforehand? And I want to get into that before we have to leave.
Sure. So it sounds like you do your own little transition recommendation. I know you're familiar with Dan Plew's program with his low carb course. So I'd recommend that as well for people that want to get more insight. I think in general, a great recommendation is to begin with a bit of a whole foods diet approach if you're just starting. And the other program that I really like is back to Tim Noakes as well. I really like his food lists, where he's kind of got the green, yellow, and red food lists. So when I'm advising my athletes and we start in with a program, I get them to start in with really just focusing on, can you have 80% of your diet now on that green list, and that's in a whole food sort of form. That really is beginning that program. And when we're doing that, we're ultimately lowering the daily insulin load and lowering the daily glucose spike, right? That's what we're hopefully doing sort of in theory. I'm also recommending periods where, we might have some periods of intermittent fasting. Tends to work if you delay your breakfast and maybe have a training session sort of in the morning. That's a great way to have a larger window where you're open and not sort of feeding and sabotaging that time under low insulin levels. If you're doing that, you're going to be maximizing your fat oxidation. It just naturally rises. Okay. So
are you doing keto with people, kind of nutritional ketosis? Are you trying to show ketones when you're working with athletes, or what's your opinion on the ketogenic endurance world?
Athletes. So some individuals come in and they're very keen, and they're and they will buy like a blood glucose and a blood ketone meter, and we'll actually document it. You typically on a daily basis in the morning, or we might do it intermittently thereafter. But we want to typically I do like to see the ketones rising above 0.5 millimoles. The beta hydroxybutyrate. That's telling me that they're achieving what they are sticking to that diet. And the other thing we use too is just a diet app. So we use the Sonza.us app. And that just is a free app, and it's available for, to be able to kind of count your carbohydrate base. So that's usually a starting process. And once people find the rules, it doesn't take that long, and they're sort of underway. It's a real challenge maybe in that first couple of weeks of this new diet. And it's amazing. They're always amazed at the amount of processed food that they're actually eating. And then, after a couple weeks to sometimes a month, but they're usually on their way to success after that. And then we can, maybe it's after a month or 6 weeks, we're starting to reintroduce carbohydrate sources, especially during key sessions, right? So some of this HIIT training with my key athletes, we like to have periods of time where we're training high, and we're experimenting with actually using carbohydrates, throwing a little bit of fuel on the fire for the very high intensity exercise sessions. Carbohydrate and glucose itself is a central nervous system stimulator. So for those key workouts, then it's not a bad idea to get a little bit of extra bang for buck in those sessions. And this is where becomes a little bit of an art, and an individual. The athlete then is starting to learn what's working well for them too, and we're documenting things typically with a GPS or a power meter and heart rate. But typically we need to get the athlete healthy first. Once the athlete becomes healthy, and we fat adapted, going longer in sessions without feeling a drop in energy, just that prolonged energy, those are key markers that we know we're on the way to success.
Yeah, that's something I'd love to kind of share more with athletes, to do that fat adaptation program. But I find it's really important to talk about gut health with athletes. And I've been doing more podcast episodes on gut health and digestion, because I think people forget that part. And then they work on going from this high carb, high stress lifestyle, and then they switch to doing a high fat, low carb diet, but they don't have proper eating habits. So eating slowly, chewing their food, and working on stomach acid. Are you acidic enough? Most people seem to need HCl betaine supplement, and then digestive enzymes and some type of bile support to help emulsify fat. So I do nutritional therapy work now, and doing FDN practitioner work that'll be able to do labs. So I think it's really fascinating to tie that all together to coaching athletes. That's all right. Let's work on your liver function, because most people have congested liver and from all of our toxins and our high stress lifestyle, and then work on our gut health and our digestion for 30 days or 4 to 6 weeks, then start building up your ability to experiment with carb dosage on your workouts and whatnot. But that's why I'm kind of want to teach people this more off season. Let's really work on your gut health and digestion, because I think that's damage from our way of life, from what we thought was good.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, I'm not an expert in gut health, so I really can't kind of comment too much. But one of the things that we've, gets lost a little bit in the ways, in the details, relates to, especially when we say low carb, high fat, we're talking about healthy fat sources that is almost intermingled in amongst a high fiber, low carbohydrate vegetable milieu, if you like it, right? So we're not, the fiber and the micronutrients are kind of coming into this here as well. And it's not like we're just consuming butter and bacon fat, along the way. So there's it can be done, but I think there's a lot to be said for balancing sort of the higher fat with low carbohydrate, high fiber diet sources. And this is kind of the things that I'm trying to get my athletes to gravitate for. And again, if you go to the green list on Tim Noakes's Real Meal Revolution, this is kind of these are the vegetable sources that complement well with the high fat sources at the same time. And again, but I can't really comment too much further, Debbie, on your area of expertise. But yeah, I get large periods of windows when the athlete is really the gut is not active, because I'm asking for these periods of intermittent fasting ultimately. And then when we are in the feed periods, I'm recommending these sorts of food sources. So I guess to your point, I'm giving the athlete's gut a period of rest, then having it to work. And that's
time restricted eating.
That flux.
The time, so that kind of ends up being the time restricted eating window, as Dr. Stamp Champanda, all of his research talks about in circadian code. And it's pretty fascinating if you read that book. It's just all the benefits. If we could just condense our eating window into 8 hours versus, or even 12 hours, sometimes I just do 5-hour period. And it gives you that much more time for your body to digest your food and heal and recover and repair. Because we tend to eat that 3 meals a day, and snack screws us up, I think.
Yeah, so much of our behavior is just, it's been enforced on us by, tradition. And a lot of
marketing.
the coaching I think that we do is breaking some of those tradition that is in Western culture. And is the breakfast the most important meal of the day? Well, it could be, depending on how you want to skin things. But for my athletes, and typically a good way to have it is no, we almost omit the breakfast kind of thing. Just throw that one out the window. Coffee might be a good substitute, but otherwise you're off. You're exercising at that period of time and taking a break from breakfast and continuing the fast overnight. That works really well for my guys. But loads of ways to skin it.
Me too. So just last question, of your favorite carb sources, what would you give athletes if you're leading up to a big training day or a big race? What type of go-to carbs do you have people experiment with, seeing how it works in their body?
Yeah, great question. So we do periodize in my key athletes. We do periodize the carbohydrate sources. 2 key times that I'll be having those. One is almost in a simulation type race scenario, and my choices would be like it would be. The carbohydrates would be coming in the diet in a complex form, such as a sweet potato or a kumara that might be added into the diet. These are not, when my athletes are doing high carb, they're up around 200 to 250 grams in the day kind of thing. So that's pretty low in the big picture of things, when they're typically on less than 100 on a given day, right? But we'll transition into these periods where we're performing or we're practicing, key sets. And then during the actual sessions themselves, typically I'm a big fan of the UCAN sources. So, and I'm a UCAN ambassador, and that the UCAN Superstarch is an amazing carbohydrate source that was, it was invented typically for children that couldn't digest carbohydrate, and it's ultimately used by athletes to slowly release the carbohydrate into their system, and it works excellent to keep insulin levels low, and works great for the low carb, high fat athletes. So UCAN sources are great. And then the other thing, I guess, is that in an event like a half Ironman or an Ironman, you can, at the very end, you can pretty much throw anything at the engine, because its performance is on the line. You're mostly depleted. So, one thing that's really key to realize is that you can still grab a gel and grab a Coke even, and grab a, whatever's kind of on that course when you're in such a depleted state. So, because these are, you don't want to sort of not have that because you're completely anti that, going towards those sugar sources. When the race is all matters, you're a healthy athlete, you can let things go for like that little bit to get you across the line. So that's my general recommendations.
Perfect. Well, I know we're out of time, and this is always fun to talk about this stuff with other people that are into it, as I've been doing it for a long time as well. When I was racing, I did do UCAN when they first came out, and we were just doing a podcast with them recently, and they were on the show years ago. We did Fit Fat Fast podcast since 2011. So somewhere along the way, we've got Dr. Tim Noakes in there. I'll have to pull all those out from the archives of way back when we really talked about this stuff before it was so known. And it's funny going to KetoCon conference and working on speaking on Jimmy Moore's low carb keto cruise that, I started all this 10, 15 years ago without really knowing it was low carb. I have fat adaptation. We didn't even call it then. We did metabolic efficiency, but it wasn't keto and we didn't really know as much back then, but we knew we're, training the body to burn fat for fuel and not having to take in much fuel in a race. I would just do UCAN and I maybe do some of a bar. And then on the run, I would start to switch to maybe some Gatorade if I had to, or that magic cola at the end of an Ironman. But once I figured this out back, I think 2005, when I started using UCAN or whenever it was, I was like doing amazing and racing, burning. I just pulled up my metabolic test from 2007. I found yesterday cleaning my closet in my office, but I was burning fat, a high percentage up to 164 heart rate. And awesome. My anaerobic threshold is 172. So it does work. Now probably even better if we know what we know now about nutrition and really putting in that higher fat, low carb, and intermittent fasting, I think really is helpful. And I always did the fasted workouts and the fat coffee. But what my book is about, what I'm trying to share with people is the impacts of chronic stress on the whole athlete. So what we're talking about works like magic, but as with my holistic method, there's other factors that come into play. So if you're not sleeping, you're chronically stressed, you're not moving throughout the day, you have poor gut health, you got to work on all this other stuff. And including, I say, happiness and play and laughter is just as important as your exercise training session, because I think we're so type A driven athletes that we're living life as a race all day that we need more time to reset and reboot and unplug and disconnect to help us repair and recover, to work on performance and longevity.
Yeah, no, definitely. I noticed that myself. You got to get out amongst it and be with others. Be outside, be in the environment, be with other people. This is what we were meant to do as humans. Don't forget that.
Yes. So thanks for coming on the show. We do have something we will talk about separately, but Ironman Hawaii 2019, you will be there. And
yes, planning it. Not 100%. I haven't booked my ticket yet, but I've got accommodation. So and I've got approval from my wife. So I think it's going to happen.
Well, good, because we're planning that meetup, so you kind of have to be there. Yeah. And we'll find out. I've got Simon Ward from the UK. He's interviewing me tomorrow, and he's going to help me find a space as well. They got Rich Shores from Colorado, and just trying to get all these people together and do a meetup for the fat-adapted athletes. So I'm excited to organize it, and I'm kind of gung-ho about it because I think it's to bring people together. Ironman Hawaii is just a great world collection of athletes that could use this information. So once you book your ticket, I can help schedule that event.
Let's just do it, Debbie. Let's just do it. Let's just say we're going to be there. So okay. Anyone else that's listening to this and they think they can help us there, and they're into this sort of stuff, let's all make this happen.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. Well, we'll let you go because we got the yard workers coming in your yard, I think.
Yeah, we do. They're right behind me now.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. And we'll get more info on the being fit and healthy and stop seeing too many fit and unhealthy athletes out there.
Thanks for listening to the Whole Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at wholeathletepodcast.com. You can help us continue and grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and see you next time.